The data show us very specifically some things that are happening in here, and these men, I'll call these cavemen, they demonstrate very, very effectively what it is that we are missing when we try to throw masculinity aside. Welcome to the Year of Living Manly. I'm James McQuivey. I am now just 3 weeks into my project, Living Manly, where I am trying to explore and understand masculinity as it is actually lived by men who consider themselves masculine. If you want to understand the background on this, my New Year's resolution, and why I've decided to try to embrace more facets of masculinity after years of believing that to do so would be to encourage the dark side of what it means to be a man. Well, I'm all in this year, and I'm having a great and powerful experience. Watch all the videos that you want to so far. I'm trying to do one of these every week. A couple of these weekends, though, I've had a day off, like today, Martin Luther King Day. I don't have any data about Martin Luther King, but I'm just going to say that man was probably very masculine, at least by the definition that I'm using from 41% of men in America who consider themselves very masculine. And then when you measure everything else they do in their lives, they're better at relationships. They're better at taking risk to support their communities. They're better at doing hard things. They're better at a lot of things that I want to be better at. And so hats off to and much gratitude to Martin Luther King Jr. On this day. And I'll use this opportunity to go further into my project. Now you'll see behind me that I have on the screen The Rescue. This is a National Geographic documentary that is currently streaming on Disney Plus. If you have Disney Plus, you have this. If you don't have Disney Plus, I'm sure there are other ways to get it. I'm not doing an advertisement for it, but I will highly recommend it. This is one of the most moving programs I've seen in a long time. Produced by the same team that did the Alex Honnold video, Free Solo, which was also riveting, but in a completely different way. The Rescue is the story told about the true events from June into July of 2018 when a soccer team of young boys in northern Thailand went missing in a cave at the surprise beginning of the monsoon season and found themselves flooded in the cave about 1.5 miles deep into the cave. You had to be living in a cave not to be aware of this story, and I hope you know the outcome, because if not, I'm going to spoil it in this video. We're going to talk about it. Why we're going to talk about it, though, is not just because the story is so amazing. It is. It's not just because it's so joyful. All of the children emerged as survivors. That was the spoiler. I apologize. But I'm okay spoiling something that's that happy. You'll be glad that you know that it ends positively, because along the way it feels pretty awful. And there are some harrowing events, and one very tragic one, which you may or may not remember from history. I won't spoil that one. This video is not the only way to look at this story, and I just want to acknowledge my wife came to this movie through a book that she has in her 5th grade classroom. Which actually I read and I recommend highly as reading, not only because it tells story elements that the documentary does not, but because the book is actually told from the story of a Thai cultural perspective and adds so much in that respect. Here's the book. I actually didn't mean to mention it, but it was so worth mentioning, I figured I'd go grab the copy and show it to you. All 13, The Incredible Cave Rescue of the Thai Boys Soccer Team by Christina Sungthornvat. Wonderful book. Highly recommended. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this rescue, this video, in the context of the Year of Living Manly, is that there's a real drama that unfolds within the real story and actual drama. So don't get me wrong, watch this movie, read the book, read other books, all in an attempt to understand the remarkable circumstances. But layered within there, nested maybe within there, is a story about men and a story about how men get things done. Now, what's interesting about this is it's not a rah-rah celebration about big, muscular men who know how to go tackle really big obstacles. Those men were involved. There were several. We had Navy SEALs from the Thai Navy. We had Air Force personnel from the U.S. Air Force who were also special forces. We had some people who would qualify in that classic definition of the very muscular, go-get-it-done kind of man. And no disparaging of those men. I'm so grateful that they were there. They were necessary. It turns out, however, they were not the ones that made it possible for these boys to get out. The crew of men that made this possible was a fairly ragtag band of unusual men. And I'm going to show you some clips of this here on my screen, just so that you understand for yourself who we're talking about here.
Caving is clearly about the exploration side of it. Some of the dives we do, you could be hours in, totally reliant on artificial light, artificial heating. It's like being in space. Probably the purest adventure you could have. It takes a peculiar type of person to be a cave diving explorer.
What makes someone want to be an explorer? I think it's 2 parts ego, 1 part curiosity, 1 part lack of confidence in yourself and the need to prove yourself. You know, maybe I was no good at footy and cricket, but at least I can, cave dive quite well.
I think it's fair to say all of us were not team players. None of us are very good with ball skills.
I was a loser.
I'm terrible at team sports. I think doesn't play well with others is the phrase that you're looking for.
I was quiet and shy and didn't like confrontation. I wasn't so sociable. I was bullied a bit as a teenager, yeah, because I was a little bit different.
I've got a lazy left eye, which when I was younger actually pointed in the wrong direction, which is quite funny looking back on it, because it was quite a big part of my life at the time. Like, it was quite it's quite self-conscious about it, Kids are mean.
There's no question that in my younger years, I started off perhaps emotionally challenged.
Yeah, I wasn't the most social person. Bit of bullying at school and stuff, but the worst people I've blocked out of my mind. But once I get underground, that all disappears.
Can't see anything. Just my bubbles. Isolated. This is the place where I kind of feel comfortable and feel like I feel safe.
Quiet and peace.
Get away from everything in normal society. Back to the age of the caveman.
It comes back to that kind of ability to expand your comfort zone. But probably some people's worst nightmares.
It's about controlling your emotions and your fear. Because panic is death in the cave.
This is the story within the story for me. These men, the ones on whom the success of the operation ultimately depended completely. There was no solution without these men. Without exception, every single one of them would not be defined by us as outsiders as that stereotypical masculine man. But now that we're already in a position, thanks to the data that I've been sharing in the videos I've made so far, we know that that definition of masculinity is insufficient. But I'm not saying that that means that masculinity is just an open bag of whatever you happen to throw in there. No, the data show us very specifically some things that are happening in here. And these men, I'll call these cavemen, they demonstrate very, very effectively what it is that we are missing when we try to throw masculinity aside. I'll show later clips that really clinched it for me, but let's just dwell here for a moment on what it means to be these men growing up, not necessarily the captain of the football team, captain of the cricket team. All of those men, I can relate to them. never really enjoyed team sports. I'll do a whole bit on that later on, probably several bits, because one of my challenges this year will be to follow a pro sports team from the beginning to the end of the season for the first time in my entire life. So yes, I'm willing to try it and see what it's like and see why so many men and women enjoy doing that. But these are men more to my liking. Men who grew up feeling like they weren't necessarily like everyone else, and so didn't always fit in. Now, in their cases, they choose to express that by challenging themselves to do one of the most unusual sports ever, and to prove to themselves in the darkness of the caves that they explore what their capabilities and what their qualities are. And what's so fascinating is that unlike so many things that we acknowledge about the incredible, Muhammad Ali's of my youth, the incredible athletes that are Olympians or captains or quarterbacks or whatever, all of those people we get to put on a pedestal. They get to make a lot of money. They get sponsorship deals. These men do things that only a few hundred people in the world even know has ever been done or will ever know that it has been done, making them people who are really doing this to explore their own masculinity intrinsically. They're not doing this so that the world will smile at them. And the series of circumstances, which they express very, very well in the video, that allows them to be called on at this time is pure coincidence. It's remarkable how coincidental it is that the people on the front lines of this cave dilemma happened to know about these men, and that the Thai government was willing to bring them in, even though they had no idea whether they would be useful or effective.
But no special force in the world has those skills. Only this private group of people who do it as a weekend hobby.
The moment I found the boys, Amp said I'd totally changed. The responsibility, despite not officially being on my shoulders, was morally on my shoulders. It had to be us.
Before you can come up with a plan, you have to decide that you're going to take responsibility. Responsibility for the outcome, no matter how difficult it is. That, to me, is the unlearned lesson of masculinity. The willingness to use your skills to benefit your community, the willingness to take personal risk, but the willingness to bear responsibility on how taking those risks might affect others. The plan, as the divers, among them Dr. Harris, who is a medical doctor, was simple. Anesthetize the boys, place them in full face mask breathing devices, feed them a mixture of oxygen, and swim them out unconscious for a 2 to 3 hour journey through underwater caves so tight that the men guiding the boys would in some cases have to push the boys ahead through cracks and then follow on after them in near zero visibility conditions, all while monitoring that the boys are still breathing, their airways are not collapsing, and that they are going to survive.
In the morning, I had a chat with Harry. I told him the truth. I said, sedation's the only option. He said he'd come out to help us, but not to sedate them.
Maybe I sounded like I just thought this would be a good jolly or a good adventure to Rick, because he said to me on the phone,
if you come here and you dive to the children and you're not prepared to sedate them, you will see the children and they will die.
this plan's still so preposterous. Surely this is not going to work. And the thought of just bringing out the bodies of these kids was just too much for me.
And this is why this story impressed me so much, not as just a story of miracles and of heroism, but a story of men finding their way as if swimming through a dark cave toward what the real definition of masculinity is. You develop your skills, you make them useful to your community, you take risks along the way, but more importantly, you accept responsibility. You accept responsibility for the life and the well-being of others around you, especially those who are more vulnerable than you are. That, to me, is the level of masculinity I would like to achieve. And honestly, when I listen to these men tell their story, I am almost 100% certain I would have failed this test.
We got the audience we needed that night.
The Minister of the Interior came and everybody ended up in the room together, and I helped to translate.
We just walked them through the plan. I think the biggest questions that people were having still was like the risk, and like I told them, it's extremely risky, but if you could give one kid back to their parents alive, that to me would be a success. They kept asking, can we just leave them in there? That kept coming back on the table. And I said, well, we're running out of oxygen. Also, we calculated 2,000 meals we'd have to bring in. And once the rain started again, you couldn't swim against those flows.
And then Tanate and I ended back up in another meeting. At one point I said to the minister, the only guarantee I can give you is that if you don't dive, everyone will die. I don't envy you, sir. Both choices are terrible, but one is worse than the other.
It was about 2 in the morning that the Minister for the Interior said, okay, assume the plan's going ahead tomorrow, and we'll give you the green light in the morning.
We had a debrief every night, and on the night before the first rescue day, which incidentally was our 28th wedding anniversary. But I spoke to him that night and he outlined what they were going to do. It was a terrible conversation because he said, look, I don't think it'll work. I think they'll probably drown under anaesthetic.
I slept very badly that night, lying in bed. I thought, who am I to take this chance to get the kids out this way? But to walk away and leave them in there, that's impossible. You can't do it.
When we look at the data about how men experience these kinds of challenges, what does it tell us about how masculine men, very masculine men, according to my survey, approach risk and being a benefit to others? This turns out to be one of the defining characteristics of men and of very masculine men more so. And this is one of those examples I expressed in a prior video how there are some things about being a very masculine man that are manliness taken to a higher degree. That is appropriate. There are those things. This is going to be one of them, and I'll show you that. There are also areas where being a very masculine man actually means being more like the average woman than like all other men. That is not the case today. Today we're talking about things that if you think about, you'll realize, oh, men do take more risks. So let's just take a very simple survey measure. It's a very common one used to measure risk attitude. Agreement with the statement, I am willing to take risks in hopes of better returns. I measure this on a 5-point scale. As I've expressed previously, I'm going to be reporting most of the data from here on out as part of this project as top 2 box on a 5-point scale. That's simple. It just means that people check the 4 or the 5, and I've added them together to say what percent of people agree or strongly agree with this statement about themselves in this case. The statement being, I am willing to take risks in hopes of better returns. Now, on average, 53% of people agree that they are willing to take risks in hopes of better returns. So half yes and half no. That's interesting. It's a nice measure. It means that we've got a nice split in the population. When we look at women, where do you think that number is going to go? 43%. This is not a revelation. This is a well-studied fact in anthropology, sociology, psychology. Men take more risks. There's some fascinating evolutionary psychology explanations for this that you don't need to buy into because the observed fact is what it is. So that means that if women are 43%, men have to be higher, and they are. They come in at 64%. Now, you could stop right there and say men are different from women. Now, remember, they're not hugely different. I mean, this is 50% greater likelihood for men than women to express agreement with this statement. So statistically and demographically, this is a meaningful difference, and it is statistically different. But it's not huge. It's not like no women take risks or are willing to, and all men do. So there's still variation even within this fairly clear answer. But what I want to do is take you the next 2 steps. Let's separate within the male category the difference between very masculine men and all other men. All other men are 54%. So round about the average of the total population at 53%. Statistically, that means what has to happen for very masculine men? 77%. 77. Now that's just over 3/4. Their preference as masculine men is to take risks in hopes of better returns. Now, if you want to paint that as some kind of pathology, like, oh, men are dangerous and men are bad, they take risks. Remember, this is risks in hopes of better returns. Surely there are people who are reckless in their risk-taking, or there are individuals who experience reckless risk-taking at specific points in their lives, usually between the ages of 15 and 25, if we're talking about men, and all of the problems that they cause to themselves and others by simply taking risk. But what I want to do is understand that the video, the movie, The Rescue, the story of the Thai cavemen, the ones that actually saved those boys, it was all about taking risk in hope of a better return. And being that willing to do that, given the danger and harm that was so likely in that situation. Well, that's the definition of very masculine. Now, I want to add to that, though. Simply taking risk is one thing, but you could say that men have to bear this burden. Oh, it's a really big problem that they have to take risks. Well, I'm going to ask you something. If I were to propose this question to you on a 5-point scale, do you agree that making sacrifices for people you love brings joy? What's your default assumption about where that's going to land? 68%. People, by and large, 2/3, say that making sacrifices for people you love brings joy. Now, I'm going to challenge your stereotype about women. Women actually don't answer that at a higher rate than average, 62% do. So that puts men above that 74%. Again, nearly 3/4 of men. And I could stop right there. That difference isn't huge. It is not as dramatic as the difference in risk-taking, and that would seem more appropriate to, observed daily life. But let's see what happens when we split out all other men from very masculine men. All other men, the number goes back down, again, kind of to the average of the population. That puts very masculine men at 86%. For these groups that I'm comparing, very masculine men, the most likely to say that making sacrifices for people you love brings joy. If that's not what you originally thought that number would be, you need to rethink masculinity, as I am doing. I want to be someone who can take more risk. That's an area I have to explore this year as part of my project, because I don't like to. I am, however, someone who's very happy and very willing to make sacrifices for people I love, and I do experience it as joy. So, some masculinity boxes I can check on the very masculine scale, and some of them I need to learn how. And that's the whole purpose of my project, the Year of Living Manly. I will never be like these men. I don't have a skill that's going to save lives, but I do have a skill that can save your day. I do have a skill or multiple skills that can save your mood, your moment. And my goal as a very masculine man is to take the risk to apply those skills on your behalf. My challenge to you, do the same, male or female, I don't care. Take that risk, make that sacrifice. Do those two things together. We will not be saving children from the cave, but we still could save someone from a moment or a day of darkness nonetheless.
Thank you so much. ขอบคุณครับ 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 Miracle piled upon miracle.
I think I hold a sort of great pride in what we did. You could say justifications for the dedication I put forward into a ridiculous minority sport that no one ever took seriously.
Yes, it's definitely changed my life. It made me into maybe a more confident person.
Last to be chosen for the cricket team, first to be chosen for the cave rescue.